The dark brown stallion exploded into the auction ring like a force of nature unleashed, his hooves striking the wooden floor with thunderous cracks that echoed through the hall like gunshots. His coat, the color of burnt mahogany, gleamed with sweat and fury as he reared up, front legs pawing at the air, while letting out a sound that was part roar, part scream of defiance, that made every person in that prestigious auction house instinctively step backward. This wasn't just an unbroken horse. This was a creature that had declared war on humanity itself. His dark eyes blazed with intelligence and rage as he whirled in the ring, muscles coiled and ready to strike at anything foolish enough to come within reach. The expensive wooden barriers groaned under the impact as he crashed against them, testing their strength with the systematic precision of an animal that had already broken through lesser confinements. 3 handlers had led him in, and now only one remained, pressed flat against the wall with terror written across his weathered face. The other 2 had fled when the stallion had lunged at them with teeth bared and hooves flying, missing their heads by mere inches. Blood trickled from fresh scratches on the remaining handler's arms, testament to how quickly this chocolate-colored demon could turn from controlled to catastrophic. The wealthy bidders who moments before had been confidently discussing bloodlines and training techniques now found themselves scrambling for higher ground, climbing onto chairs and backing toward exits. Their expensive suits and polished boots meant nothing to an animal that viewed every human as either predator or prey, and he had clearly decided which category they belonged to. The auctioneer's voice cracked as he tried to maintain some semblance of control, his gavel shaking in his white-knuckled grip, while the stallion continued his display of raw, untamed fury. This horse hadn't just been difficult to train. He had systematically destroyed 3 separate facilities, putting 2 professional trainers in the hospital and ending the careers of men who had spent decades believing they could break any animal. Bidding cards remained frozen in trembling hands as the dark stallion wheeled around the ring, his powerful body a weapon of muscle and bone that radiated pure, concentrated wildness. No amount of money seemed worth facing down this tempest of flesh and fury that had turned the refined auction house into his own personal battlefield. Then, cutting through the chaos like a calm voice in a hurricane, a small figure appeared at the ring's edge, 10 years old, carrying nothing but a rope and an expression of quiet understanding that seemed impossible for someone so young. Some horses are born wild, but this dark brown stallion had been systematically taught to hate every human who dared approach him, and the scars of that education ran deeper than flesh. His story began not in violence but in promise, when his rich mahogany coat and intelligent eyes made him the crown jewel of Riverside Training Facility, a place where champions were supposedly born through patience and understanding. Those early days painted a picture of potential that seemed limitless. His bloodline traced back to legendary racehorses, his conformation was flawless, and his natural athleticism suggested a future filled with ribbons and recognition. The facility's owner had paid a fortune for him as a yearling, convinced that this chocolate-colored colt would become the foundation of his breeding program and the star of his training roster. But somewhere in the transformation from promising young horse to broken spirit, something went catastrophically wrong. The details varied depending on who told the story, but the results were always the same. A magnificent animal whose trust had been shattered so completely that he began viewing every human interaction as a battle for survival. Some whispered about harsh training methods. Others spoke of a trainer who believed fear was the only language horses understood, but the truth remained buried beneath layers of legal settlements and carefully crafted silence. The first facility released him after he put their head trainer in the hospital with 3 broken ribs and a punctured lung. The second lasted only 2 months before their insurance company demanded his removal following a series of incidents that left experienced horsemen questioning their career choices. The third facility, run by a man who claimed he could break any horse that drew breath, lasted exactly 6 weeks before admitting defeat and shipping him off to auction with a warning label that read like a death certificate. Word spread through the horse community like wildfire about this chocolate demon who could read human fear with surgical precision and exploit every weakness with terrifying intelligence. Professional trainers who had built their reputations on handling difficult horses suddenly found urgent business elsewhere when his name was mentioned. Cowboys who had never backed down from anything with 4 legs made excuses and changed the subject when asked about taking him on. He became a legend of the worst kind, a cautionary tale about what happens when the bond between human and horse is severed so completely that only violence remains. His burnished coat still gleamed with health and power. His conformation remained flawless, but his eyes held depths of pain and rage that made even the bravest horseman look away. Yet beneath all that fury, beneath the explosive reactions and the systematic destruction of everything human, something flickered that few were wise enough to recognize. The desperate cry of a soul that had been betrayed so thoroughly that violence had become his only language of communication. Sometimes the soul of an old horseman finds its way into the smallest and most unexpected vessels, and 10-year-old Samuel carried within his young frame a wisdom that belonged to someone who had lived a dozen lifetimes among horses. His appearance spoke of simplicity rather than wealth, tousled brown hair that refused to stay combed, clothes that had been mended more than once, and boots that bore the honest scars of barn work and pasture walks, rather than the pristine polish of show rings. But his eyes held something that made adults pause mid-sentence. When they looked into them, they were the color of storm clouds just before dawn breaks, and they carried a depth that seemed impossible for someone who had barely reached double digits in years. When he moved through crowds, grown men found themselves stepping aside, not out of courtesy, but out of an inexplicable sense that this child understood things they had forgotten or perhaps never learned at all. His small frame weaved between the legs of towering adults with purpose that bordered on the mystical, as if he could see pathways invisible to others. The expensive suits and designer boots around him might as well have been costumes in a play he had no interest in watching. His focus remained laser sharp on something beyond their understanding, something that called to a part of him that remembered truths older than fear. People tried to stop him, their voices urgent with warning and concern. Hands reached out to catch his shoulders, to pull him back from what they perceived as certain danger, but he moved with a fluidity that seemed to anticipate their intentions, slipping past their grasp, like water finding its way around stones. Their whispered warnings about the dangerous horse, about broken bones and shattered dreams, seemed to pass through him without leaving any mark. In his weathered hands, small though they were, he carried a rope that told its own story of legacy and loss. The leather was soft from years of use, darkened by the oils of countless hands that had gripped it before it had belonged to his grandfather, a man whose reputation among horsemen had bordered on the legendary, whose ability to communicate with difficult animals had been spoken of in reverent whispers long after his passing. The old man had spent his final months teaching Samuel secrets that couldn't be found in books or learned in training facilities. He had spoken of horses as beings with souls as complex as any human, of the invisible threads that connected all living things, and of how sometimes the greatest healing could only come through the smallest and purest hearts. Samuel moved forward with the quiet determination of someone who understood that fear was simply another language waiting to be translated, and that sometimes the most profound truths could only be whispered from one wounded soul to another. Miracles unfold in the space between heartbeats, and what happened next in that auction ring defied every expectation of violence that had gathered like storm clouds in the minds of watching men. The 10-year-old boy stepped closer to the dark brown stallion while 300 people held their collective breath, waiting for the explosion of fury that had become this horse's signature response to human approach. The air itself seemed to thicken with anticipation as Samuel moved forward, his grandfather's rope hanging loose and unthreatening in his small hands. This was the moment when careers ended, when bones shattered, when the chocolate-colored demon proved once again why fear was the only rational response to his presence. Yet the boy's steps remained steady, unhurried, as if he were approaching an old friend rather than a creature that had hospitalized grown men. The stallion's muscles coiled beneath his burnished coat, every fiber of his being poised for the violent dance he had performed so many times before. His dark eyes locked onto this small approaching figure, nostrils flaring as he processed the scent of someone who carried no fear, no aggression, no intention to dominate or break. The absence of familiar threat signals seemed to confuse him more than any whip or rope ever could. Minutes stretched like hours as these two beings studied each other across the short distance that separated trust from terror. The massive stallion, whose shoulders stood taller than the boy's head, found himself face to face with something he had never encountered. Pure, unguarded compassion that asked for nothing and offered everything. His ears flicked forward in curiosity rather than aggression, a subtle shift that only the most experienced horseman in the crowd recognized as significant. Samuel took another step closer, then another, his storm cloud eyes reading every twitch of muscle, every shift in breathing, every micro-expression that flickered across the horse's face like pages in an ancient text. His grandfather had taught him to decipher. He saw past the reputation, past the violence, past the broken trust that had turned this magnificent creature into a weapon of self-defense. The horse's breathing began to slow, his rigid stance softening, almost imperceptibly, as something deeper than fear or anger stirred within him. For the first time in years, he found himself in the presence of a human who spoke the forgotten language of patience, who understood that healing could only begin when dominance stepped aside to make room for understanding. The boy raised his hand slowly, not to strike or control, but simply to offer connection. The stallion's nostrils fluttered as he caught the scent of honest intention. And in that moment, something shifted in the very fabric of what everyone believed was possible between broken trust and second chances. Boundaries between the possible and impossible dissolve. When witnessed by 300 people who suddenly question everything they thought they knew about fear, trust, and the mysterious connections that bind wounded souls together, the 10-year-old boy's hand moved through the charged air of the auction hall with the deliberate grace of someone placing the final piece in an ancient puzzle, his small fingers extending toward the dark brown stallion's neck, while every breath in that room was held captive by disbelief. The moment of contact arrived like a whisper, cutting through thunder. When Samuel's tiny hand touched the stallion's rich mahogany coat, the world seemed to pause its rotation, allowing space for something sacred to unfold in the most unlikely of places. The horse's skin was warm beneath the boy's palm, alive with the rapid pulse of a heart that had learned to expect pain, but found instead the gentle pressure of understanding. No explosion came. No rearing hooves or bared teeth materialized from the chocolate-colored demon that had terrorized experienced horsemen for years. Instead, the stallion's breathing began to slow, each exhale releasing years of accumulated tension, as if the boy's touch had unlocked something that violence and force had only buried deeper. His dark eyes, which moments before had blazed with the fire of a creature at war with the world, softened into something approaching wonder. The transformation was so subtle, yet so complete, that grown men found themselves questioning their own eyes. This wasn't the same horse that had entered the ring like a force of nature unleashed. This was a being remembering what it felt like to be touched without intention to harm, to be approached without agenda beyond connection. The auctioneer, a man who had conducted thousands of sales with practiced efficiency, found his voice catching in his throat as he attempted to process what was unfolding before him. His gavel trembled in his grip as he struggled to remember the mechanics of his profession, while witnessing something that transcended the boundaries of simple commerce. Samuel's voice, when it finally broke the cathedral silence of the hall, carried the quiet confidence of someone who had never doubted the outcome. He spoke of his intention to purchase the stallion, his words accompanied by a worn envelope containing bills and coins saved from countless hours of helping neighbors, feeding livestock, and believing in second chances when no one else would. The money itself seemed insignificant compared to the currency of trust that had already been exchanged between boy and horse. The stallion stood motionless, his great head lowered slightly, as if in acknowledgement of something larger than ownership. something closer to partnership forged in the rare alchemy of mutual recognition. In that moment, the auction house became a cathedral where the impossible had been witnessed and the broken had found their way back to wholeness. Panic spreads faster than truth when witness to miracles challenges everything people believe about the natural order of things. And the auction house erupted into chaos as men who had spent lifetimes around horses suddenly became experts on what was impossible. The gavel had barely finished echoing before weathered ranchers surrounded Samuel, their faces etched with genuine concern and barely concealed horror at what they perceived as a child walking willingly toward his own destruction. Their voices rose in urgent crescendo, each man sharing his own catalog of broken bones and shattered dreams that the dark stallion had authored over the years. Stories poured forth like water through a broken dam, tales of seasoned trainers left questioning their life choices, of insurance companies refusing coverage, of facilities closing their doors rather than risk another encounter with the chocolate-colored tempest that now stood calmly beside a 10-year-old boy. Some offered to buy the horse from Samuel on the spot, their checkbooks emerging with the desperate urgency of men trying to prevent a tragedy they could see unfolding in slow motion. Others spoke of calling authorities, their voices tight with the conviction that allowing a child to own such a dangerous creature bordered on criminal negligence. The air filled with dire predictions and grim warnings, each man certain that he was witnessing the prelude to disaster. Samuel's parents arrived breathless, having received frantic phone calls about their son's purchase, their faces pale with the kind of worry that only comes from loving someone who seems determined to dance with danger. His mother's hands trembled as she took in the massive stallion standing quietly beside her small son, while his father's jaw worked silently as he calculated veterinary bills and funeral expenses in equal measure. Yet through all the chaos and concern, Samuel remained unmoved, his storm cloud eyes holding the same unshakable confidence that had carried him through the crowd earlier. The rope in his hands never tightened, never jerked, never showed the tension that radiated from every adult voice around him. His quiet certainty seemed to create a bubble of calm that encompassed both him and the horse, a sanctuary of peace in the midst of mounting hysteria. The walk to his family's trailer became a processional of disbelief, onlookers gathering to witness what many were convinced would be Samuel's first and last attempt to handle his new companion. Their simple, weathered trailer stood in stark contrast to the luxury rigs that surrounded it, its honest rust and practical design speaking of families who measured wealth in different currencies than those who frequented prestigious auctions. As Samuel led the massive dark horse through the gauntlet of worried faces and urgent warnings, something remarkable became clear. The stallion moved with the careful grace of a creature protecting something precious, his powerful frame instinctively sheltering the small boy who had somehow unlocked the door to his wounded heart. Truth reveals itself, not in thunderous proclamations, but in the quiet persistence of small daily choices. And Samuel's farm became a sanctuary where broken trust could slowly remember what healing felt like. The modest property stretched across rolling hills, dotted with weathered fences and honest barns that spoke of generations who understood that wealth was measured in different currencies than those traded at prestigious auctions. Coco stood in their sturdiest paddock, his rich chocolate coat gleaming in the afternoon sun, as family members and neighbors maintained what they considered a respectful distance from danger. Their whispered conversations carried the weight of concern and curiosity as they watched Samuel settle into a routine that defied everything they understood about horse training and common sense. The boy's approach unfolded like a meditation on patience itself. Where others had used force and intimidation, Samuel offered presence. Where traditional breaking techniques had failed spectacularly, he chose simply to exist in Coco's world without demanding anything in return. His small frame could be found each morning sitting cross-legged near the fence, a worn book open in his lap as his clear voice carried stories across the paddock to ears that had learned to fear human intentions. Hours passed like prayers as Samuel read aloud tales of adventure and friendship, his voice weaving through the morning air like a gentle current that gradually wore smooth the jagged edges of Coco's hypervigilance. The stallion's dark eyes tracked every movement, every gesture, searching for the trap that never came, the violence that remained conspicuously absent from this strange new equation. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, something began to shift in the space between them. Coco's rigid posture softened by degrees, his constant pacing gradually giving way to curious stillness as he found himself drawn to the sound of this young voice that asked for nothing but offered everything. The boy's presence became a fixed point in a world that had taught the horse to expect chaos, a lighthouse of consistency in the storm of his traumatic memories. Samuel's approach revealed wisdom that seemed borrowed from someone far older. Each decision filtered through an understanding that true healing could never be rushed or forced. He recognized that Coco's aggression was simply fear wearing armor, that beneath the chocolate-colored demon lived a soul that had been wounded so deeply that violence had become its only language of self-protection. Day after day, the boy returned to his post beside the fence, sometimes reading, sometimes simply sitting in comfortable silence, while Coco learned that human presence didn't automatically mean human betrayal. Their relationship grew like morning light across a meadow, gradually, naturally, with the inevitable patience of seasons changing and wounds slowly transforming into wisdom. In this sacred space of unhurried time, Samuel proved that sometimes the purest hearts possess keys that can unlock doors experience and strength had only managed to bolt tighter. Healing happens in whispers, so quiet that only hearts already attuned to the language of wounded souls can recognize the moment when trust begins to bloom, where terror once ruled absolute. 3 weeks of patient presence had passed before the breakthrough arriving not with fanfare or dramatic revelation, but with the subtle grace of morning mist settling over still water. Samuel noticed it first in the way Coco's ears oriented toward the fence during their morning ritual, no longer flicking constantly in hypervigilant surveillance, but instead focusing with genuine curiosity on the boy's gentle voice. The stallion's breathing had changed too, losing the shallow, rapid rhythm of perpetual anxiety and settling into something deeper, more contemplative, as if he was finally allowing himself to believe that this small human might be different from all the others. The moment itself was so understated that anyone else might have missed it entirely. Coco simply walked toward the fence of his own accord, drawn not by the promise of food or the compulsion of force, but by something far more powerful, the magnetic pull of unconditional acceptance. His massive frame moved with careful deliberation, each step a conscious choice to trust rather than retreat, to explore rather than defend. Samuel's grandfather's rope finally emerged from where it had rested patiently in the boy's lap, not as an instrument of control but as a bridge between two souls ready to meet in the sacred space between fear and faith. The worn leather felt warm in Samuel's small hands, carrying with it the memory of countless other partnerships forged through patience rather than pressure. The ancient dance began with movements so gentle, they seemed choreographed by the wind itself. Samuel's hands spoke in the forgotten language his grandfather had taught him, each gesture an invitation rather than a demand, each touch a question rather than a statement. The rope moved like liquid silk between them, never tight enough to threaten, always present enough to connect. Coco's response unfolded like a flower opening to sunlight after a long winter. Where explosive violence had once been his signature, now there was cautious curiosity. Where defensive aggression had protected his wounded heart, now there was tentative exploration of this new possibility. His dark eyes, which had blazed with the fire of a creature at war with the world, now held the soft wonder of someone remembering what it felt like to be understood. The transformation was subtle, yet profound, like watching ice melt in the first warmth of spring. Coco began to lower his great head, bringing his breath closer to Samuel's outstretched hand, allowing the boy's scent to become familiar rather than threatening. Their connection deepened with each shared moment, moving beyond the simple absence of violence towards something approaching the friendship that both their souls had been seeking beneath layers of fear and protective armor. In this sacred space of mutual recognition, Boy and horse discovered that sometimes the most profound healing happens not through grand gestures, but through the accumulated weight of countless small moments of choosing trust over terror. Legends are born, not in moments of conquest, but in the accumulation of countless small victories that gradually reshape what the world believes is possible. And the story of Samuel and Coco spread through the horse community like ripples expanding across still water. The same weathered horseman who had issued dire warnings at the auction now spoke in hushed, reverent tones about the 10-year-old boy who had accomplished what decades of professional experience had declared impossible. The transformation was so complete, so profoundly beautiful, that it challenged everything the horse world thought it understood about broken trust and second chances. Visitors began arriving at the modest farm, drawn by curiosity and disbelief, only to stand speechless at the fence line, watching a chocolate-colored stallion who moved with the grace of partnership rather than the violence of survival. Samuel understood the truth that escaped most observers. He hadn't tamed Coco, hadn't broken him or bent him to human will. Instead, he had simply learned to listen to what the dark brown stallion had been trying to communicate. Beneath all that fear and fury, the boy had recognized that sometimes the loudest cries for help come disguised as aggression, that sometimes the deepest wounds require the gentlest touch to heal. Their partnership became a living testament to the power of patience over pressure, understanding over intimidation, and the remarkable courage required to see past reputation to the heart of who someone truly is. Samuel had proven that wisdom doesn't always come with age, that sometimes the smallest voices can hear the biggest truths, and that healing happens not through force but through the persistent application of unconditional acceptance. The final chapter of their story unfolded across open fields, where Coco ran not from fear or pain, but toward freedom itself. His powerful legs carried them both through meadows painted gold by afternoon sunlight, his dark coat rippling like liquid mahogany, as he moved with the confident grace of a creature who had remembered what it felt like to trust. Samuel rode with his grandfather's rope coiled loosely at his side, a symbol not of control but of connection, a bridge between two souls who had found in each other exactly what they had been searching for. Their bond transcended the boundaries of age and size, species and circumstance, proving that sometimes the most profound relationships are forged not through dominance, but through mutual recognition of shared vulnerability. Together they moved through the world as living proof that broken things can be made whole again, that trust can be rebuilt even after it has been shattered, and that love expressed through patience and understanding can heal wounds that force and fear had only made deeper. If this story touched your heart and reminded you of the power of second chances, please hit the like button and subscribe for more videos like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video, where we'll explore another tale of unexpected healing and the bonds that connect us all.